segment might have been somewhat satisfying. It was still heavy. You know, the stories about Gaza are difficult to cover. But I wanted to kind of pivot over to the topic of a potential war with Iran, which honestly, the United States has been pressured to engage in, not just over the last few years, not just over the last decade, but for literally decades. Now, oftentimes when we talk about Israel and how I believe that we're being pressured by Israel to go to war with Iran on Israel's behalf, it's because I know too much, I've seen too much, and honestly, Netanyahu can't keep his mouth shut. So that's what this segment's about. I want to put our current moment in historical context. And with that being said, let's get into it.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
That clip that you just watched featuring Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was from September 12th, 2002, prior to the US preemptive invasion and war in Iraq. And interestingly enough, he name drops Iran as he is encouraging the United States to go to war with Iraq. Now, of course, Israel had an interest in the United States fighting a war in Iraq, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. And what we should do, and what I really wish our political class would be willing to do, but they're all too corrupt to do it, is maybe consider the mistakes that were made in the lead up to the preemptive war in Iraq and how we were being goaded by the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu to do that invasion based on a false premise. And that false premise was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, we did the invasion. It was a complete and utter disaster. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And of course, everyone should be asking, why the hell did we invade a country that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11 and really posed no threat to US national security, especially because they did not have weapons of mass destruction? Now, the fact that they didn't have those weapons didn't stop Netanyahu from lying to the American people and the American government. And when the US finally invaded Iraq in 2003, do you think the IDF joined us in that war? No, they sat back. They watched, they enjoyed, as over 4,000 American soldiers died, as hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians died. So now we're thinking about a potential war with Iran. Does Iran pose a national security threat to the United States? No, they don't. Does Iran pose a national security risk or threat to Israel? Yeah, they do. If Israel wants to fight that war, they should fight that war. But Israel doesn't want to fight that war. They want you or your kids to fight that war. They want you or your kids or your family members to pay for that war. And that's a super strong statement to make. I get it. Until you actually look into the history and the decades of statements and lies that have been uttered by Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel. So let's get into that. Israel's current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been pressuring the United States to fight its wars in the Middle East for decades. Okay, so in every instance that I'm going to show you, he lies and fearmongers about Israel's enemies allegedly developing nuclear bombs or having weapons of mass destruction. And if you're wondering where the Bush administration got that idea, who planted the seed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, look no further than Netanyahu, who as early as December of 1990 was already spreading lies about the threat of these Middle Eastern countries. So here he is. This is December of 1990 on the Today Show. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think I've stated our policy, and I think it's very much your policy. That is, the question is really, how do we ensure that these weapons of destruction, these missiles, these chemical weapons, the nuclear program that is fast accelerating in Iraq, that these do not pose a threat in the aftermath of the crisis, assuming it gets out of Kuwait. This is an issue for the entire international community.
Saddam Hussein did not have possession of chemical weapons. He did not have possession of weapons of mass destruction. He was not developing a nuclear bomb. That was a lie. And just think about the timing here. This isn't December of 1990. Okay, so you have Netanyahu already going to work. All right, how do we manufacture consent for war in Iraq? Not a war that we Israelis want to fight, but we want to get Americans to fight it for us. So he began planting that seed, but it didn't take long for Netanyahu to use the same fear-mongering tactics when it came to Iran. Here he is in his first address of a joint session of Congress. This is in July 10th of 1996. I was just 10 years old when he addressed a joint session of Congress in order to drum up support for a war. Let's take a look at that.
The most dangerous of these regimes is Iran, that has wed a cruel despotism to a fanatic militancy. If this regime or its despotic neighbor Iraq were to acquire nuclear weapons, this could presage catastrophic consequences, not only for my country and not only for the Middle East, but for all of mankind. Only the United States can lead this vital international effort to stop the nuclearization of terrorist states. But the deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close.
The deadline is getting extremely close. Bro, it's 1996. What are you talking about? In 1996, you have Benjamin Netanyahu saying, weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear bomb is right around the corner. We must do something about it. We need regime change. US, invade. Spill your blood. Use your treasure. We're going to sit back and watch you do it. We're not going to get involved, but we're going to pressure you to do it. And by the way, this is 1996, but this is before the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. And Citizens United, made our politically corrupt system so corrupt, it's on steroids, which creates an opening for foreign interests to have far more sway and influence over our politicians. So, back in the 1990s, you've got Bibi Netanyahu running his mouth about how, Iraq and Iran, they've got a nuclear weapon right around the corner. We got to do something about it. But no one was willing to pull the trigger, probably because they hadn't been corrupted enough yet. Because remember, the politicians aren't going to send their kids to fight that war. They're not going to go fight that war. Mark Levine's fat ass isn't going to go fight that war. Your family members are going to fight that war. Ordinary Americans are going to fight that war. So a single year after the 9/11 terror attacks, the terror attacks that Netanyahu said were good for Israel, Netanyahu testified before Congress and encouraged the United States to invade Iraq, but he also cited his other interests in that region. Take a look.
The problem is you're not dealing with Iraq alone. You're dealing with a terror network. You're dealing with a system where you have proxies. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. So I guess that doesn't include California, but includes Washington. But what it does, a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is, while no one is watching, under the cloak, is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. I believe that the next step is to choose. It's not a question of whether you have to take action,
just choose the right one.
But what kind of action and against whom. Saddam is probably, in many ways, a linchpin, because it is possible to take out this regime with military action, and the reverberations of what happens with the collapse of Saddam's regime could very well create an implosion in a neighbor regime like Iran. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
Yeah, I'd love to see a regime change in Israel. I see Israel as a much bigger problem than the Middle Eastern countries that he's referencing here. Keeping it real. Notice how he mentioned Libya in that speech in 2002. Gee, I wonder why the United States got involved in that conflict. I wonder why we engaged in a regime change war in Libya that took out Gaddafi. Was it because we were concerned about the people of Libya? Because we're certainly not concerned about what's going down in Libya right now with the literal slave trade. Makes me sick. This makes me sick. On September 27th, 2012, Netanyahu gave an embarrassing speech before the United Nations General Assembly and lied repeatedly about the nuclear threat posed by Iran in order to drum up support for regime change in Iran, obviously carried out by the United States. Let's take a look at that.
So how much enriched uranium do you need for a bomb? And how close is Iran to getting it? They have to enrich enough high enriched uranium for the first bomb. Where's Iran? Iran's completed the first stage. Took them many years, but they completed it. And they're 70% of the way there. Now they're well into the second stage. And by next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks.
That was September of 2012. September of 2012. Netanyahu claimed, oh my God, Iran, months, maybe weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Think about it. Big threat. Okay. By the way, the Iran nuclear deal that was secured by Obama and some of our allies wasn't signed until 2015. So between 2012 and 2015, there was no deal ensuring that Iran was not enriching uranium to build a nuclear weapon. And in that time period, they didn't have a nuclear weapon. By the way, you want to know who does have nuclear weapons? Israel. The Israelis have nuclear weapons. They don't admit it. It's a big open secret because the U.S., the theory is that the U.S. illegally